Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comics on which we've wasted our youths. Only now, well, there's no waste involved, and there's really only one half of the equation involving youth, because we are talking today about a gigantic subject. I horned into this whole Wednesday comics thing on Mike's channel. He had no say in the matter, so he gets to pick what we choose. And if you've been watching his channel, or if you saw my recent Wednesday video on his utterly mad, Latverian level, Doctor Doom level mad plot plan to read the foundational comics of Marvel Comics, then you will know that for a long time now, for months, he has been reading Thor, one of those foundational comics from Marvel, from Stan Lee's reinvention of the superhero genre. Every issue of the original run on Thor, 400 or so issues of Thor, he's been reading all of them. The good parts and the bad parts, and boy oh boy does this character have those. And he's just recently finished. So today we are both talking about Thor, about just that first enormous run on Thor. And I couldn't really be happier. Thor is my favorite Marvel character. But he wasn't always. Because he didn't debut in his own book. If you watch comics now, you think, well, if you even so much as sneeze, you have to make a first issue out of it. But that's not true. That wasn't always true. Once upon a time, you had an established book, something that was selling middling to average. In other words, sales figures that would be a runaway hit today. You have something that's selling middling to average 50,000 copies a month, something like that. You would introduce a character in a feature in that book. They wouldn't have the whole book, but you would give them a story. And you would see how fans react, because for the first 50 years of Marvel Comics, the attitude among the management and the editorial team at Marvel was, we will find out what the readers like and will therefore buy, and we will give them more of that. We will not do our best to find out what they like and then intentionally, spitefully not give them that, give them the opposite of that, laughing while they tell us, if you keep this up, we're going to walk away with our money, and then laughing even more when they do. When they do. So that now a best-selling comic is 2,000 issues a month. The industry is dead because it was handed over into zealots who like the fact that they are producing things that fans hate. Once upon a time, that wasn't true. And so you would float ideas. Stanley had 10 ideas before breakfast. And he would float ideas, he would give them little features to see how they do. They wouldn't have to carry the book on their own. They would just see how they do. Every once in a while, he would feel like making a first issue. But a lot of times, no. Some of the foundational characters in Marvel Comics did not have proper first issues for the first 50 years of their existence. The Hulk, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man himself got a first issue, but only because his appearances in Amazing Fantasy were so incredibly popular. Otherwise, who knows how long he'd have stayed in Amazing Fantasy without ever having a spin-off book. Stan Lee kept a gimlet eye on sales, on the real world, and he also paid attention to what potential there is here and what fan reaction is. What kind of letters am I getting? Let's say even apart from sales, what kind of letters am I getting? And he had the idea of a switcheroo character. This was very popular in the 40s when he was learning how to write and read comics. A switcheroo character, the most famous example would be Captain Marvel. Not Carol Manvers Captain Marvel, not any of the other Captain Marvels, but the real Captain Marvel, that is now called, for legal reasons, Shazam. That Captain Marvel was enormously successful. At his peak, he was outselling any other superhero book. And he was a switcheroo character because he was a boy named Billy Batson who gained the ability to become a superpowered Superman clone named Captain Marvel by saying a magic word, Shazam. So that you could come up with all kinds of gimmicky plots. The bad guys would always gag him, or he would be in a soundproof booth, or he'd lose his voice, or something, some gimmick like that. The gimmick went away once Billy Batson became Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was physically unopposable, like Superman used to be. He was physically unopposable. So there was no gimmick then. The door was closed then. The only gimmick there was that we got the impression, it was never explained, that Captain Marvel never wanted to stick around. That he was always looking to see when he should turn back into this snot-nosed kid. Stan Lee grew up on he loved those comics and read them, and he thought, in the 60s, he thought, well, what about a switcheroo character of my own? Captain Marvel gets his powers from mythological beings. Not all gods. A couple of titans, a couple of mortal heroes thrown in there, but he gets his powers from them. He derives his powers from Zeus and Atlas and Achilles and whatnot. And Stan Lee was thinking, okay, so that's been done. But what about Norse mythology? He was an avid reader. What about Norse mythology? Who's the most famous figure in Norse mythology? Well, that would be Thor, the god of thunder, the guy with the hammer. Everybody knows that. What if I do a switcheroo character along those lines? So, in another book, a book that before Thor's first appearance was very much Michael K. Vaughan territory. It was a book called Journey into Mystery. It was all about the weird, the strange, monsters, giant ants, talking apes, the classic Michael K. Vaughan territory, which is why I'd never bought an issue of Journey into Mystery. I saw it on the stands all the time. I never bothered with it because no one in Journey into Mystery was from Krypton. Stan Lee came up with an idea. Well, okay, I want a gimmicky character like that, but I want to be a little more gimmicky. Once Billy Batson turns into Captain Marvel, the story is effectively over. That's the part that the fans are going to love the most. They're going to love him punching a giant robot or whatever. But the story, dramatically speaking, is over. Because no one can beat Captain Marvel. What if I go that one better, and with Norse mythology? And all that was moving around in his head, so he came up with a story where a lame American physician named Dr. Donald Blake is vacationing in Norway when Earth is attacked by aliens from Saturn. And Dr. Donald Blake takes refuge in a cave. He loses his cane, but he finds a walking stick. And he thinks, well, that's nice. I don't have to limp around while I'm hiding from these aliens. And for some reason, he doesn't use the walking stick as an aid to walking. Instead, he swings it around and it bangs against a wall, and suddenly it bursts with energy, and he finds himself transformed into Thor, the Norse god of thunder. The hammer says, whosoever shall hold this hammer, shall he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor, not shall become Thor. And in those first issues, Dr. Donald Blake does not become Thor. He just transforms into a Captain Marvel-like version of himself. Much bigger, much more powerful, incredibly strong. The walking stick turns into the magic hammer Mjolnir. He can suddenly control the weather. He is suddenly an incredibly powerful being. So he takes care of the invasion force, and then we, over the next few issues, the next few appearances in Journey to Mystery, I wasn't paying all that close attention, but the next few appearances in Journey to Mystery, we learned the gimmick limitations, which is that Donald Blake has no powers on his own. He's essentially Billy Batson. He has to bang that walking stick on the ground to become Thor. And in the gimmick that was absolutely crucial, it was the linchpin of so many Stan Lee stories. If Thor lets go of his hammer for more than 60 seconds, it transforms into a walking stick, and he transforms into Dr. Donald Blake. So he has a huge limitation on him. He can't let go of that hammer. And of course, it's a throwing hammer. It's a war hammer. So he often does want to let go of it, or can be tricked into letting go of it, or whatnot. It presented Stan Lee with a million gimmicks along those lines. Oh my God, is he going to let go of his hammer? Oh my God, it's been 60 seconds. Oh my God. And that was kind of dull. That was kind of boring. Captain Marvel himself was kind of boring until he got a sidekick named Captain Marvel Jr. There was nothing boring about Captain Marvel Jr., but Captain Marvel was kind of boring. And Thor in Journey into Mystery just sort of chugged along that way, fighting Merlin, fighting other characters, these dumb, idiotic, disposable villain of the issue. It was obvious that it was a left-handed exercise on Stan Lee's part. Jack Kirby left the book. Stan Lee left the book. The writing and art were by third stringers. No offense to the Leiber family, but they were by third stringers. It wasn't anything that you wanted to pay attention to. It was, you were kind of wondering, I guess, in some of those Journey into Mystery early issues, you were kind of wondering. I can't in honesty say that it occurred to me to wonder it, but you were kind of wondering, well, does this Thor know any of the other characters that are all of a sudden turning up on my newsstand? The idea that these people all lived in the same world was still new. So you really weren't thinking that way. You weren't thinking, oh, well, how's this going to affect the Hulk if suddenly Thor is in the Marvel Universe? You weren't thinking that. I wasn't thinking that. Maybe some people were. Those original issues, okay, so a guy named Dr. Donald Blake, who is as bland as dry oatmeal, transforms into a superpowered being. Okay, great. Superpowered being has to hold on to his croquet mallet. If he lets go for any length of time, he turns back into Donald Blake and is easily defeatable by anyone. And so there'll be all sorts of stories built around that gimmick. Okay, fine. I wasn't all that interested. I have to say here, I know this is a contestable point. Mike would probably contest this. I have to say, though, most of Stan Lee's earliest Marvel, his archetypal, his great Marvel creations, became great over time. Very few of them were great to start with. I think that Mike's next gigantic reading project is the Fantastic Four, and bless him, he's got lots of great reading in front of him. I think the Fantastic Four is the next group he's going to. But the Fantastic Four is terrible at the beginning, just terrible. And Thor is terrible at the beginning. The Avengers, as I've covered here on this channel, much to the howls of Avengers fans, are terrible at the beginning. There are exceptions. The Hulk had pretty much all of his inherent pathos from the beginning, and had a heck of a first issue. Of course, the two most famous examples of Stan Lee creations that were perfect from the beginning were Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Even the X-Men might have had more potential than the Avengers did at the beginning. But I think that reading all of the X-Men is way down on Mike's list for this mad Doctor Doom reading plan of his. And that's good, because reading all of the X-Men is going to kill him. so it's good that he's saving it for last. He can just go out on that. He'll be fine for the original run of X-Men. He'll be fine when Neil Adams comes on to do the artwork. He'll even be fine for the reprint issues, and he'll certainly be fine for the initial relaunch of the X-Men with the all-new, all-different X-Men. That is some great reading. And then, hoo-hoo! We don't have to think about that. For him, that's years from now. I didn't pay all that much attention. I'm pretty sure that I got Thor's first appearance in Journey into Mystery, and I think I did something that I don't know that kids do anymore. I don't know that kids actually socialize with each other anymore, but I traded it. We used to trade. You said, well, you have something I want, I have something you want. How about we trade? We'd get together and do that. It could be fun. Either I traded that first issue or my beagles ate it. The first appearance of Thor, and same for a lot of the others. The later ones that came along, they weren't anything keepable. They weren't anything keepable at all. I didn't particularly love Doctor Strange in that initial run with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, but I knew that the issues were really good, and they were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Same thing with Spider-Man, even the Avengers. But Thor, ironically, considering that he would go on to be my favorite Marvel character, I thought nothing of it when I was seeing him at the newsstand. I was buying some great comics from the real superhero company, DC. But gradually, Stan Lee came back, and Jack Kirby came back with him. Now, I don't know the reason behind that. Stan Lee was a champion mythologizer. I don't believe that he had a malicious bone in his body when he was doing that. I just think he liked to come up with the story, his best version of how things happen, and stick with it until he actually believed it. I don't know what caused that. I don't know whether or not Marvel's publisher said, we're going to cancel this thing. It's not doing well. If you don't pump life into it, we're going to cancel it. And whether or not Stan Lee said, well, no, I made these things. I don't want any of them being canceled. I'll do what it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to get the sales numbers back up. I also don't know if he was maybe told that by his father-in-law. I don't know how that happened, but he came back to Thor. Kirby came back to Thor, and they started gradually doing things differently. Suddenly, Thor started to be a little bigger as a character, a little grander as a character. And, crucially, Thor stopped being Dr. Donald Blake in disguise. He started being Thor. Suddenly, or gradually, Dr. Donald Blake, when he rams that walking stick on the ground, was not transforming into a superpowered version of himself. He was transforming somehow into the Norse god of thunder. And that story got fleshed in with a backup feature. Thor's stories in Journey to Mystery started being only 6 or 7 pages, and then the other 6 or 7 pages of the issue was something called Tales of Asgard, the home of the Norse gods. And this gave Stan Lee and Jack Kirby a chance to do something bigger. something fantastical, something much along the lines of Prince Valiant from Stan Lee's youth, from Stan Lee's formative period when we were all in love with Prince Val and couldn't believe we were getting this in the Sunday paper every week. Suddenly he realized, or gradually he realized, well, I've got this guy, yes, but I've also got this whole mythology, and if I'm going to say that he is the Norse god of thunder, well, then I can use all of this stuff. I can reinvent my own Asgard, my own frost giants, my own gods and goddesses. And they did. They started to do that. The mail started coming in right away for Tales of Asgard. The backup feature, Tales of Asgard. Fans loved it. Just loved it. They wanted more. Before that, fans had been bombarding Marvel Comics offices with letters saying, look, I love this new story, this new character, Thor, but he doesn't look like the mythology at all. Shouldn't he have a beard? And aren't you spelling the name of the hammer wrong? And what's this business about Donald Blake? What is he Thor or is he not? Fans started asking that, and Stan Lee, bless him, realized that's the direction I should lean in. And so he did. And Jack Kirby did as well. Jack Kirby started giving us visuals, the like of which had never been seen in a comic book, Marvel or DC, before. Comic books, you probably know, they're very, very structured. Usually it's 7 or 9 panels per page, just to move the action along. Suddenly, Jack Kirby wanted to give you set pieces. Stunning visuals, something much more along the lines of the Sunday comics for Tarzan or John Carter of Mars or Prince Valiant. And it was wonderful. I don't know quite when I started to notice the change, but I did. I started gradually I started buying Journey into Mystery. I started really wanting to get these issues. And you see, I think part of the reason maybe was the inker. The inker was Vinnie Coletta. They brought him on. I don't mean to malign. An earlier inker for some of these Journey into Mystery adventures was an artist named Chick Stone. I really like Chick Stone as an inker. I think he's really, really good. And I wouldn't have objected to him staying with Thor all along, but he was a little bit slower, a little bit more meticulous of an inker. Vinnie Coletta could do 4 books a month. And he does something with artists, especially with Kirby. I think it was a match made in heaven. He really enhances motion and violence. He's really good at that. At the cost of roughing up figures. So that bothers some connoisseurs of comic book artwork. This is a Jack Kirby cover with Vince Coletta inking. And this is, let me show you what I mean on the inside here. This is Journey to Mystery 125, and it's a great dramatic cover, and this is what I mean. Look at that panel. Look at that panel. That is our character shattering a boulder. It's nothing for Thor to do that. He does it all the time. But look at that panel. Look how incredible that is. With the rocks are coming at you. They're obscuring Thor, and the sound effect is hitting you before any of that. It's amazingly done, just amazingly thoughtful. And it goes on. It's just incredible. This whole issue is incredible. Look at this. There is Odin, the king of the gods, being threatening. Look at the perspective there. Odin is a source of drama, a frequent source of drama in Thor comics. But this issue is about Hercules, the Greek god Hercules, who has come to Earth just to have fun when this swank nightclub that he's in is suddenly accosted by armed bandits. And they open fire with their machine guns, and you'll notice something that I always wondered about, and it isn't actually addressed. This panel is the closest that we ever get. What would happen if you shot Hercules? It looks like he's wounded, but not inconvenienced at all. And I always wondered about that. Nothing's done with it at all. But look at this. What Hercules wants to stop these people, so he uses his mace to smash down a lamppost and throws it at them from a distance. Look at the motion there. Look at how Kirby makes the car stationary in order to emphasize the fact that they have just been their wheels have just been demolished. But we are going through this. See, you're getting in-house ads for all of these Marvel comics that were coming out, but not for any DC comics, of course, that were coming out. Were the ones that I really preferred. And that story ends, and we get Tales of Asgard, which is a whole other story, drawn by Kirby, written by Stan Lee, and inked by Vince Coletta. And these backup stories are also great. And then you get the letters column, which may or may not feature ardent missives from Iowa. And see what I mean? This is Journey into Mystery number 125. So Thor still doesn't have a book of his own. But the sales by now, with these epic storylines, with Thor facing Hercules and fighting a roster of suddenly great villains, the Grey Gargoyle, the Absorbing Man, the Destroyer, suddenly the sales were there, and I don't know the actual story of what happened. Did Stan Lee go to his boss and say, I think this can be a book on its own, and get the green light? But the green light was given, because the next issue, they keep the numbering of Journey into Mystery, but it's now Thor. It's not Journey into Mystery with the mighty Thor. It's Thor. Just Thor. And it just continues being great. You have the front story, and then the backup story. And the front story involves Thor versus Hercules. It's just amazing. Just amazing stuff. They fight before they team up, they fight. And the story goes on. Thor now has his own book. Thor eventually helps Hercules in the realm of Pluto, the death god of the Greek gods. I want to get you a great visual. Look at this. Look at stuff like that. Just amazing. Kirby gives himself over to this, and Stan Lee is perfectly happy to let him do it. Perfectly happy. Hercules is tricked into going to the underworld. Look at the effect here. See that? I don't know if you can really tell what I'm talking about here, but if that panel had not been inked by Vince Colletta, this would be less threatening, because another inker would have delineated this. They wouldn't have just hinted at a downward staircase to hell. They would have delineated it. Joe Sinnott, for instance, would have delineated that in a way that I think would have hurt its power. But we get Thor, of course, goes to the underworld to help Hercules, and we get another one of these great panels. Look at that. No motion lines at all. Thor is smashing through these things, and we know the motion because of the broken blades. Again, Thor is almost obscured. It's a wonderful. It works perfectly from here. You can feel it, the action there. It's just, Kirby's doing great, great work here. And he is also doing great work in Tales of Asgard, and it's different work. It's much grander work. Look at this. That is nothing that had ever been in a superhero comic book before. That is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So fans were reading this stuff and loving it. And one of the big reasons that they were loving it is because Dr. Donald Blake was nowhere to be found. These were grand mythological adventures where mythological creatures showed up to test Thor at his own level. Not Thor versus the Stilt Man, but Thor at his own level. Even the Norse god of death. There's Hela, the goddess of death, summoning Thor's spirit to the underworld. What a cover. What an amazing thing. 15 cents was no small amount of money, and I handed it over gladly to get issues like this from the newsstand. Gladly I did. This one has a backup that is not Tales of Asgard. This features Triton, the loser Inhuman. But the main story is good enough, because Thor is fighting the Wrecker, and the Wrecker seems to have won. Seems to have killed him. It's just amazing. Amazingly good. And those big, big events keep coming. Now, the Destroyer is one of those big enemies. Not Merlin or bank robbers or anything. The Destroyer is a suit of invulnerable armor that Odin made so that someone could inhabit it, someone's soul could inhabit it at Ragnarok and help out with Asgard. But of course that plan doesn't work. None of Odin's plans work. Instead, bad guys inhabit the Destroyer's body, and it's almost unbeatable. It certainly can beat Thor. Unlike what you see in the first Thor movie. And another huge villain that comes along is a being called Mangog, who possesses the strength of a billion beings. He is as strong as a billion beings, as he tells you over and over again. He might not know how to dress himself or how to brush his teeth, but he knows that has the strength of a billion beings. So Stan Lee came up with the idea, okay, what would happen if the Wrecker or Pluto in the underworld, those are formidable adversaries. But what if Thor came up against an adversary that he simply couldn't beat physically? An adversary who was physically unbeatable. That is the Mangog. And that's what you get here. You can look at that. Behind him, Ragnarok. Mangog is awakened. and wants to destroy all life. I mean, and he knows the way to do that. The way to do that is to go to Asgard and pull the Odin sword from its sheath. The Odin sword is something that Odin made, where if you pull it, it's a giant sword, if you pull it from its sheath, all the universe ends. It's another Odin toy that he leaves around, like the Destroyer's armor. Why he has it, why he doesn't break that enchantment and melt it down, I don't know. But Mangog approaches Asgard, and Asgard has to fight. All the gods in Asgard have to fight. And we get scenes like this. Look at that. That is incredible. There, you can follow the march of the army all along there, all the way to the front. How amazing. Kirby, to put it mildly, in the original run of the original appearances of Thor in Journey into Mystery, did not get a chance to do stuff like that and was not asked to. Instead, here he can be as epic as he wants. There, the Mangog sees the Odin sword and has only to reach it, and these few gods that stand in his way can't stop him. He has only to reach it and kick it from its scabbard, and all the universe will end. And notice, I'm on page, what are we doing here? I'm on page 20. This no longer has Tales of Asgard. It's just the whole of Thor in one issue. And we move on. Of course, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby don't stay. They don't stay forever. And as is true in almost all of the books that they did together, the final issues that they have together are not good. But Thor is doing well, so it moves on to other creators. Same villains, though. It's still Mangog. He is back. This is, we are now up to 20 cents. Is that right? 20 cents. This is a great Thor cover by John Romita Sr. You can tell by the thumb there. And also by one other thing that's going to be a little hard for you to make out. John Romita Sr. adamantly drew Thor's hammer Mjolnir with the head of it being shiny metal. He was adamant about that. He was the only artist that drew it that way. All the others draw Thor. Here you go. This is a perfect example. All the others take Jack Kirby's lead and have Thor's hammer be stone. It's stone. But John Romita Sr. apparently not. Didn't like that idea. But here we move on to artwork by John Buscema. Also inked by Vinnie Colletta. And that, I think, is an unfortunate matchup. I never liked seeing that matchup. Because, like I said, Vince Colletta enhances fluidity and motion and impact. And the thing is that Buscema doesn't need you to do that. He's really good at doing that himself. So he doesn't. You're not going to enhance his work to do that, and Colletta couldn't adapt. What Buscema wants, what you want with him is either the ideal solution, the ideal scenario is you want him to ink himself. He was his own best inker. But if not, you want an inker who's going to just carefully delineate everything he does, because he's a really careful writer. It's not just broad sketches. Thor moves on, and we move with him. We're still at 20 cents. We're up to $2.19. There is a fairly good John Buscema cover. He usually doesn't do good covers. But here we move. Notice, still no Donner Blake. We're still having massive adventures out of this, a 2-page spread for something called 8-track tapes. I don't know that you know what those are, but once upon a time they were all the rage. But here, Thor and his friends are in space. They're having adventures in space. Here they are facing the Black Galaxy, which is threatening the colonizers of Rigel, who are fleeing their homeworlds to avoid being consumed by this Black Galaxy. Which gives us a great quote. Thor is standing on the deck of a ship with Sif and Balder the Brave. They are Asgardians, so they don't need to worry that much about standing on the deck of a ship in space. And Balder says, 9 billion people, my lord, the entire population of the colonizers' lost world, in flight from a menace they cannot escape. 'Tis most strange insanity. Why do they not stand and fight? And Thor says, because they are only mortal, brave Balder, and their lives are too short to be spent in useless warfare. They seek only to live, and honor can mean nothing to such creatures. Only life matters, and only death is feared. And in the end, who can say if this is a strange insanity or strength we may never hope to understand? Little bits and pieces like that, giving Thor a personality, and I might add, not a particularly attractive personality, because if he thinks that about the colonizers of Rigel, he must think that about his colleagues on the Avengers. That they don't have any honor, because they're mortal. But Thor's big cosmic adventures continue, and whenever they do, Thor is great. Almost always. until the end, until the late 80s and 90s, in which case he could be as cosmic as he wants. He's still a gigantic loser with a capital L. But the big menaces come back on board. We get Thor against Galactus. We get Thor against Mangog a couple of times. We get Thor against the Destroyer. The Destroyer returns. Notice this is a John Romita Sr. cover, and notice again, Mjolnir is metal, shiny metal. He's the only one who drew it that way. But here we get just fantastic artwork as Hercules faces off against the Destroyer. Just terrific stuff. Well worth the money, up to 25 cents now. We got some great contained storylines. This is one of my favorite ones. Here we have a Gil Kane cover where a giant robot abducts Jane Foster, who was the love interest of Dr. Donald Blake. She was a nurse and he was a doctor, and that was a big gimmick in romances of the day. And no one, Stan Lee included, ever bothered to explain why once Thor becomes Thor, he would still be in love with Jane Foster. He has a love of his own, the goddess Sif. Suddenly, he loves these two women, and for a brief period, they are the same woman. It was very, very disappointing. I'll get to it. But for a brief point, they were the same. In this storyline, they're the same woman. Sif has given her life to give Jane Foster life. But for a long time, for a decade, that isn't true. And I was one of the only people I ever saw on the letters page who said, why? Why would Thor doesn't even know this woman. Why would he be in love with her? He's not Dr. Donald Blake. But instead, we move on. This storyline had 4 parts facing these time twister beings who have these etoliated creatures who have the ability to let energy beams out of their eyes that age people, devolve them to babies or age them into old crones. And when Thor and his colleagues face off against them, so we have in this issue we have Odin being weird. Odin is always weird. He's either captured or he's insane or he's got an inscrutable plan that goes wrong. Whatever it is, he'll do it. But here Thor and his friends face off against these beings, and they let their eye beams loose, and nothing happens. And once again, we get a little discourse on what it is to be mortal versus immortal. Fandral, one of Thor's friends, says, "By thy father's eyes, Thor, yon aliens' life-devouring rays have consumed us not at all." And Thor says, "Nor shall they, friend Fandral. What matter the ravages of time to we who are immortal?" And that storyline concludes, and we go on. Of course, Odin is insane. Here we get the price. Notice they say still only 25 cents. Now these things are $5. But once upon a time, that meant a difference. That made a difference. When comics went from 20 to 25 cents, and when you get this, you know that a cost of 30 cents is coming. When they went from 20 to 25 cents, I remember thinking, well, I'm going to have to cut back on what I buy. Now it's nothing. Now, $5 a piece. You go to the comic shop, you want all the new issues, which once upon a time, I wasn't getting all the new issues, but I was getting a great number of them. Now, if you do that, you spend $60 at the comic shop every week, which is ridiculous. That's not tenable for basement-dwelling incels. But here we get Tony DeZuniga doing the inking. Again, John Buscema, he is sticking with the book for a long time. I don't think that Tony DeZuniga is particularly good as an inker for him, but stories go on, and so do the annuals. There was also a bigger annual issue every year for these popular books, and Thor Annual number 5. First of all, old-time Thor fans got the pleasure of having Jack Kirby come back to do the covers. Thank God he never asked to do the interiors, because he would have asked to write them as well. But he came back to do covers, so every once in a while we would get Jack Kirby drawing a Thor cover. Here, once again, we have Hercules. And those two old guys in the background are Thor's father, Odin, and Hercules' father, Zeus. And this is terrific. It's one huge mythological issue where the Asgardians fight against the Olympians in war. Look at that. Amazing. Just these sorts of things. It's a self-contained issue. Annuals usually were. Wonderfully worth the money. This thing was 50 cents for a comic book. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this interminable video, I don't know how long this is going to go. This is the whole run of my favorite Marvel character. But when I mentioned at the beginning that there were dull spots. There weren't many of them. Once Stan Lee and Jack Kirby got the measure of this character, there weren't many dull spots. There weren't many downsides. When Lee and Kirby's run on Thor was ending, there were issues that were pretty bad. And when I forget who it was, I have the issue right here. When whoever took over and Buscema took over the artwork, their initial first issues weren't all that great. Then we got a great long storyline, the Infinity Saga, that went on for 7 issues. And after that, you could almost always count on Thor to be really good, to have something really good going on. And then that started to break down. And suddenly you were getting long stretches of Thor that were terrible. And I stopped buying the book when the artwork was absolutely awful, when the storylines were absolutely dumb, when the panels they were crowded. We had no more of that great epic stuff that Kirby was doing, that Buscema could do so well. We didn't have any of that anymore. Thor became an afterthought again several times in the lifetime of the comic book. But life was breathed into it by something we've just recently talked about on this channel. Walt Simonson returned to the book as writer and artist on Thor and brought it to heights of excellence it had not seen since Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And these issues were incredible. Absolutely incredible. Walt Simonson was able to take risks. This issue, for instance, is told entirely in full-page panels. And it's expensive. This was what, 75 cents? Yeah, 75 cents. But you didn't think you were being gypped at all. Or a larger 300th issue, Thor number 300. You note the number there is 382 because they're still honoring the Journey into Mystery numbering. But here you have Thor number 300. Look at this. An advertisement for a movie called House 2, the second story. But here we have a pat ending. Thor breaks his brother's arm with his hammer and gives the wound an enchantment so that it won't heal right away. Loki's going to have to deal with a broken arm. This issue number 300 wraps up a whole bunch of stuff from earlier issues and leaves us with a clean slate. Thor flying off, happy as a clam in his now unnecessary armor. And after Simonson left the book, there were downsides again. There were periods where I started watching Thor, in other words. It wasn't an auto-buy. I started watching Thor to see whether or not the creative team was something that I liked. Eventually, we got around to an artist that has also come up on this channel, Ron Frenz, who started to do really good work on Thor. So that the whole time that he was on the book, I got it, where we're moving into the 90s. Thor is facing off against these other characters and giving, notice here, I don't know you'll be able to tell, but Ron Frenz is drawing Thor like Jack Kirby would draw him. Not always. Kirby would never have done a panel like this, for instance. But he would very much do a panel like this. That looks exactly like something that he would draw. And you get a mixture of that, just depending on what Ron Frenz wants to do. Panel arrangements like this are all Ron Frenz, and really, really good. It would never occur to Kirby to do something like that. So that made it interesting. And then in the 90s, Thor took a little costume change. As you can see, he changed his hair, he grew a red beard, he had gigantic 90s shoulder pads. I don't know what's going on there? Our stupid team, they're all this soft-core porn, they're all concerned about their public image and whether or not they're putting on extra weight. And in their headquarters, see, they're all in bed, they have nothing better to do, it's the 90s. They're all in bed, but at their headquarters, they have this weird old war club. And they don't know what it is. They just have it there mounted on a wall. They're not really thinking anything of it until its owner comes to call, and that owner is Thor. In a weird costume, a weird 90s costume. And he walks straight through a wall. He doesn't need to deal with doors. He's more powerful than that because he has sensed the presence of his warhammer, the mighty Mjolnir, his Uru mallet. Apparently, the writer of this book not being 100% aware that Stan Lee invented Uru. Maybe it's an homage. He swats these people away like insects and then disappears with his hammer. Very strange appearance from Thor. But he goes back to being normal. We get the continuation of that Juggernaut story where he's fighting the Juggernaut and is determined that only one of us can win here. Again, these kind of panel layout is very much Ron Frenz and not Jack Kirby. But Ron Frenz would do a lot of explicit Kirby imitating. And then Thor is briefly replaced. His soul is in hell, and he's replaced by a human in a different Thor costume. Whenever you change Thor's costume, it's usually bad news. You shouldn't ever do that. I only know of one instance where it was done well, and we'll get to that. But otherwise, no. Thor in a halter top? No, I don't think so. But it's not Thor. It's a human named Eric Masterson. And unlike the Thor that had been around for decades at this point, but very much like the original Thor in Journey into Mystery, Eric Masterson is still himself when he gains the power of Thor. He is still a bumbling mortal human being. He doesn't gain, another really good Ron Frenz artwork, but he doesn't gain an alternate identity. Thor is not an identity that you can take on. He's a person in his own right until you get to Twitter-infected, ideological, blue-haired activist comic book writing, in which case Thor is an identity you can take on. Jane Foster, the aforementioned human nurse, can become Thor, and people will just call her Thor. You aren't Thor. It's not a position in the Navy. It's a name of a person. But nevertheless, here you couldn't. Here, Eric Masterson transforms into this giant version of Thor with the command of the hammer, but he's not Thor, and everybody knows that. And eventually he takes on a super name of his own and gets his own comic until he is rather courageously killed off. And that comic was called Thunderstrike. I bought the whole run of it, thought it was really good, really liked the artwork. And again, the annuals kept going. Most of them were really bad, but a couple of them stood out, and one of them was this epic return by John Buscema, where we get his artwork on Thor. Just delightful. Little bit low energy. Buscema was not a young artist by this point, but the compensation for that, I don't know if, well, you probably weren't able to tell, and you probably don't remember my old Conan videos from last year. But one thing that you can definitely make out here, one thing that you can tell, let me see if I can get a better page. Well, this is good. If you look at the darks, the shadows in the cape, the shadow on the hammer, the shadows down under here, look at the fluidity of how this fades on the legs as they stand away from you. That inking is absolutely perfect for John Buscema, and that's because it's his own. He does his own inking in this anniversary issue, so entirely worth it. But you would also get weird one-off things like this. This is an inventory story, but you get Thor drawn by Alan Davis. It's a very distinctive Thor, a very elongated Thor, but still very good. Something you definitely want to have. This is not in continuity at all. This is just a standalone story on its own. And then the bad issues kept coming, but eventually we reached the beyond. We reached beyond the realm of Michael K. Vaughan's Thor reading, but I'm never going to get another chance to do this. Thor's first number ended with Heroes Reborn, a horrible reboot effort on Marvel's course. That lasted for a while. Fans didn't like it. They wanted their characters back. And eventually, because Marvel was still in the hands of people who wanted to do what the customers wanted, they gave them back. They brought their heroes back. But it gave them a perfect chance to change some of the heroes. And the hero that was changed most was Thor. Because he was brought back with a totally new costume. The polka dots were gone. Instead, we got armor. Not the same armor that he wore in the Simonson run, but different armor. Armor that, let me get you a good shot of it. It's, I think, successful. I think it was a good, successful redesign. You get the Destroyer again. You can't keep a good villain down. You get the Destroyer again. Let me see if I can get you. This is an action issue, so I might not be able to, but I want to see if yeah, there we go. This is Oliver Coipel. I think he's the one who designed this. For some odd reason, his Thor has no bridge to his nose. So his Thor does not have human anatomy. You have bridge to your nose there. You don't just go flat from your forehead to the edge of your nose. You don't do that. Unless you're a Cro-Magnon, you don't do that. For some reason, his Thor does, but I don't know why. But with his design of Thor, Thor is wearing armor from head to toe. And he has a strap to hold his hammer. It's a good design. It's a good costume design. I didn't object to it at all. And you'd think I would, but because I've been such a long-standing fan of... there we go. I've been such a long-standing fan of the original design, but it's still a guy in a big red cape. So I didn't mind all that much. And with this particular issue, this is a variant edition of Thor number 5. You've got the J. Michael Straczynski Thor, and you've got the Oliver Coipel artwork that was so good. But I had to get this because it's Walt Simonson drawing the cover, drawing Thor in this new getup. uh, just because he loves the character. I had to have that. But those older issues, these older issues that I was reading and loving, I was loving these things, but as you can tell, I'm not archival about my comics or about anything else, or even my friends. Even my friends look 10 years older than they really are. I'm not archival about anything. I'm rough on my things. I've been reading this. I was rereading this issue for 40 years. Whenever I felt like getting back into the jolt of Behind Him, Ragnarok, this great moment where Mangog is pounding his way through Asgardian forces, and only the Rigelian Recorder and Sif and Thor, they're the only ones left. They're standing between Mangog and the Odin sword. And we get this panel here where Thor says, "The very walls begin to crumble. Art thou frightened, most fair Sif?" And she says, "Whilst I stand with thee, my lord? Nay, whatever befalls, my heart is calm, and ever thine." And then an explosion of violence. Whenever I needed a hit of that scene, I would go back to this issue, even though I knew that I was tearing it apart, that it wasn't going to last. So I was very eager for Thor to get reprinted. He had a reprint comic of his own. Marvel Spectacular was the name of it. It was a monthly thing where we just reprinted old Thor comics to make new fans for the regular new book. But those were staple paper comics too. They were also vulnerable. It never really occurred to me that I would ever get what I wanted, but in my mind, occasionally, with my head resting on the belly of a pig while I read, I would think, wouldn't it be great if there were a book of Thor? Instead of comics, wouldn't it be great if there was a book? And eventually, I got my wish. I got this thing. And again, by now I've given you a mini tutorial. This is John Romita Sr. drawing Thor. You can tell by the thumbs. You can always tell John Romita Sr. by his thumbs. But also by the fact that Mjolnir is metal. His Mjolnir is shiny metal. But this is a gigantic Treasury edition, and it reprints the long storyline that we have already seen. The long storyline where Thor faces off against Hercules. And hijinks ensue. That whole story that spans the breadth between Journey into Mystery and Thor was now in this one big thing for $1.50. $1.50. Half of your weekly allowance. But worth it. Absolutely worth it. This had the original covers of all of the reprinted issues, and it also had an original pinup. Let me see, we can get to it. These are all reprinting the Jack Kirby run on Thor, but the pinup in the middle of this thing is original artwork by the current artist on Thor, who was John Buscema. And here he gives us the whole cast. All these characters are the whole cast of Thor. That was well worth it. That was wonderful, and as you can tell, I read this thing to pieces too. But I never really thought I'd get a book, until enough time had passed for the powers that be at Marvel Comics to realize we can charge anything we want to reprint these things. Our fans are older. Our original fans are older. A lot of favorable memories are wrapped up in their reading of these original comics. How many Thor fans remember that change to Thor being more mythological and more epic? How many of them remember Doctor Strange facing off against Dormammu? How many of them remember the Fantastic Four encountering Galactus? They remember those things. They will pay for reprints of those that are archival in quality. And so Marvel started coming out with something called the Marvel Masterworks line. And when the Thor volumes came out, I got them all. They were expensive, but I got them all, because they reprint all of Thor in a book. This is the very issue that I just showed you, isn't it? Let's see. Yeah, this is the very issue that I just showed you. Only it's cleaned up. It's on plastic paper. It's not going to rot. It's not going to fade or fritter like that old news pulp. Instead, it's in a book. It's a hardcover bound book. So I got all of these as they were coming out, even though they took a bite out of the budget. The budget was bigger. So I mean, this thing took a bite out of the budget, very much so. But the budget was bigger, and I was just like those other Marvel fans. I loved these things and wanted to keep them on a shelf, not in a footlocker or a steamer chest. And then later on down the line, Marvel kept realizing this. They, as Michael K Vaughan has pointed out on his channel, they became and stayed very savvy in the reprint line. They knew that all of their old fans loved this old stuff. And then later, after around 2012, 2016, they also realized that those old fans were not buying any of their new comics. The new comics were suddenly designed to repel those fans. We hate you. The new writers, the new artists, even some new editors were saying, yeah, we really don't like you. We don't want your business. We don't want you to spend money on our stuff. So I know you've been going to the comic shop faithfully for 50 years, but we don't want you to buy our comics, the new comics on the stand. Well, that kind of loyalty has a momentum of its own, but if you tell those fans that for years and make comics designed to have them hate them, you are going to drive them away. You will eventually be successful, and they were. But so that made the reprint line all that more important, which led to the very foundation of this ongoing series, Marvel's Epic Collection line, where they reprinted, they did a lot of Thor. They reprinted a lot of Thor issues. And that was wonderful, because you got to see all this stuff all over again. All these great departures that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were doing. You get to see all of it. Look at this. At one point, Thor's hammer, a chunk of it is cut off, and he saves the piece, and he goes to the Smiths at Allentown and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He doesn't go to Asgard. He can't get to Asgard. He can't get to Asgard to fix his hammer. So he goes to the forges in Pittsburgh to use their forge to reforge his hammer. And we get one of the classic gambits of the time was for Kirby to put a photograph as a backdrop to his artwork. So he just put a picture of a smithy. You get all of that in these Epic collections. And these cover almost all of that original run of Thor. There are even, I believe there's even an Epic collection for the later run with Oliver Coipel, the one that I showed you, that I don't have, but I really should. I really should have it, because I love those issues and I go back to them a lot. And there you go. That drops us off. Sorry for the long video. That is Marvel Comics Thor in its entire huge 400-issue first volume. Amazing, with a little bit extra, a little bit after Heroes Reborn. So I haven't watched, once again, I haven't watched Michael K. Vaughan's video. I'm sure that he's posted it by now. But I doubt very much that he and I will disagree on the main currents of Thor. I doubt very much that we will. It's not possible for you to look at, I think he's a bigger fan of, for instance, the artist Keith Pollard than I am. And I guess Pollard is proficient. But when you're talking about Kirby or Buscema at the height of his power, or Walt Simonson at the height of his power, it's tough to settle for proficient. Probably he likes a lot of those middling issues better than I do. But then again, he was reading them all in one blast, and I never did that. I read these things from the beginning, so I was getting these things drip, 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 and loving them for a long, long time. Not anymore. I don't bother with Marvel Comics anymore. But for a long time, Thor was their version of the big guy in the red cape, their version of Superman. And I loved it, especially when you add in the mythology and the complexity. Suddenly this character is very interesting in a way that most Marvel superheroes are not. When Thor is on Earth, for instance, he's sanctimonious. He says, I wouldn't so much as step on a bug. I'm here to protect humans, not to hurt them. Transport them to the realm eternal. He's killing frost giants left, right, and center without even thinking about it. Doesn't wound them, doesn't take them prisoner, just kills them. It's really neat. That kind of thing. I sank myself into all these when I knew that this was our topic, and I had a blast. God knows what price I'll pay for this, but this was fun. So that is Marvel Comics Thor. Amazing. I wish I had Michael K. Vaughan's ability with thumbnails. How much fun that would be to make a thumbnail for this. But that's the whole of this character. I love revisiting these works. I kept all those Marvel Masterworks. I have a bunch of Thor Epic collections. I'll get other collections. I'm seriously thinking about the new issue of that big hardcover omnibus of a lot of these classic, the classic Walt Simonson run on Thor, mainly because the coloring was improved. I'm seriously thinking about that. It's still a chunk of change, but it'll go out of print in another few months, and then the price will be 5 times as much on eBay. I don't know. But it was wonderful to revisit all of these eras. Now I'm going to put all these comics back and hope I don't destroy them while I do so. And I will finally wrap this up, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.